I don't think India is particularly happy with the way things are going because of two reasons. First is I think India will be disappointed over the fact that India began discussing a trade with the US much longer, uh, from maybe 7 to 8 months of the time that we have with us till now. It was one of the earliest countries to start negotiating. However, even then, the outcomes of the negotiations have not really been good for India if looked at in relation to other countries. So it's now on a tariff list of 25% vis-a-vis most other countries, which now actually have tariffs lower than the reciprocal tariffs that were originally announced for them. Number one. Secondly, I think India is also a bit, upset or worried, or whichever way you describe it, over the fact that there are certain other issues that are complicating the negotiating context with India. First of this is the fact that India has got very closely aligned with the BRICS perspective of Donald Trump. It is one of the founding members of the BRICS, but today the BRICS is being identified as a bloc which is perceived as anti-American in various respects. So the BRICS is really kind of under the spotlight. And the second is that India's relations with Russia, and particularly India's purchase of energy products from Russia, are beginning to really complicate the trade talks. And that has been made very clear, not just by President Trump, but also by the US Secretary of State. And I think both these factors are impacting the outlook for negotiations.
Well, the latest list released by the White House doesn't include China because they're still negotiating. Does Beijing have more of an upper hand, do you think, when dealing with the US on trade? What bargaining power does it have?
Factually, definitely, Beijing is best placed among all American trade partners to handle this situation, not just because it is the second largest economy, but also because of the fact that it has the ability to retaliate against the United States in a much more purposeful fashion than other economies of the world. So, for example, when the United States came in with its export control orders, Beijing retaliated by its rare earth export control orders. And it also did not stop from the retaliatory tariffs. In fact, the history goes back to some 7 to 8 years during the first term of President Trump. So I think Beijing has been playing the waiting game. Beijing has been wanting to play this out for as long as possible. There are several rounds of negotiations that Beijing has had with Washington, and today I think they are at a stage where they are looking at roughly a 30% baseline of tariffs, which honestly is not something that China is going to be too worried about because it still knows that it has a huge advantage over its competitors in scale, in the ability to produce practically everything. And the fact that new transshipment rules are being announced by the United States also means that China's direct exports to the United States will become much more important as opposed to rerouting them through other so-called connector economies.
And what impact will whatever deal China cuts with the US on trade have on the rest of Asia?
Yvonne, if you look at the kind of deals that we are getting, it's not just that tariffs are being imposed on the partners, and it is not just that these partners are offering more market access to American goods. There are also purchase commitments that are coming. And particularly if we look at the bigger economies, for example, Japan has agreed to invest in the United States. South Korea has agreed to purchase. China already in the phase one of the US-China trade deal, which was signed some 8 years ago, China already agreed to higher purchase. I think today what we are going to see going forward from here, insofar as the US-China trade deal is concerned, is basically a situation where both the US and China agree to pull in a kind of equilibrium from where they would expect the condition to remain for about at least a year or two. But this also means that in the entire process, China continues to remain as much of a negotiating position as the US does, and that is something which the Asian economies have to note. Because for the Asian economies, they now will require to also negotiate with China, not just the US. And that is something which they need to know, because China is not going to allow a situation where Asian economies have entered into deals with the US, but those deals should not in any way disadvantage China in their relations with these economies. That is something that China is going to clearly put its foot down on.
Really interesting to get your views. Thank you so much, Dr. Amitendu Palit.
Thank you, Yvonne. Nice joining you.